Rambam. We are learning laws of giving. Giving here, you know what you're giving to yourself. Meiser Sheni, we're talking about the second tithe. So it is a gift, it is giving, but it's a giving that we have to go to Jerusalem uh, and bring this 10% and celebrate their holiday time and so on, right? That's what the second tithe is. So, chapter 2. The second tithe should be eaten by its owners within the walls of Jerusalem. As the verse says, and shall eat before God your Lord in the place that he chooses to cause his name to dwell. Give me a moment. Sorry. Perfect. All righty. So as the verse says, and you shall eat it before God, your Lord, right? As the place that he chooses. Remember in Chumash, Jerusalem wasn't yet chosen as a place. So the place where he chooses, where God finally chose, right? To cause his name to dwell. So in Jerusalem. It must be observed whether the temple is standing or not standing, right? It's the place, right? Because the holiness of Jerusalem is not nullified even though the temple is destroyed, right? We have the Western Wall, it's holy. Because the holiness is derived from God's manifestation, the Shekhinah, that was present there, and therefore holiness can never be nullified. So it is still, has the holiness. And therefore the second tithes still need to be, right? So must be standing or not. Nevertheless, we partake of it only while the temple is standing. For the verse says, and the tithes your grain and your wine, your oil, the firstborn of your cattle or your sheep, according to oral tradition, was taught, just as the firstborn is not eaten except while the temple is standing, so too the second tithe is not eaten except when the temple is standing. So tithing, and it's speaking about the firstborn, they're in the same verse together, right? They're brought in together. Therefore, the firstborn only is given when the temple is, right, because the Kohen gets the firstborn of your cattle, so, and they get it in exchange for the work they do in the temple. They're not doing the work in the temple, so they don't get it now. So, like, they don't get it since they're brought together, the second tithe. So it's to teach us that it too is only brought when the temple is standing. Because even though the holiness is there, so you might say, well, you still have to bring it because there's still holiness there. No, only when the temple is standing. It is pious behavior to redeem the second tithe for its full value. In the same manner, as it should be redeemed while the temple is standing. So today, since we don't have the temple standing, so we can't go and eat right? So you have to redeem it. the second tithe. Our sages, however, ruled that in the present age, if one desires, he may redeem a mana's worth of produce for a pruta as an initial and preferable measure. But this produce need not be considered more stringently than consecrated property, and the pruta should be discarded in the Mediterranean Sea. So what you can do, pruta is like a nickel, right? Dime, nickel, dime, whatever. In other words, you can, a mana is like, $100 worth, for example. You could redeem it on a dime. Even though we said pious behavior is full value, but our sages rule that no, in present day, it shouldn't be for full value because you can't do anything. Because remember, what you do when you redeem something, so this food, right, that is second tithe, it needs to be redeemed. If I'm going to do full value, I can't do anything with it because they don't have that temple now. They could take that money and go and buy stuff there to use it, which would be what was done in times of the Holy Temple, because you didn't want to load your donkeys with a lot of stuff. That would be a lot of produce. But now, if you would do it full value, you'd be just throwing away the money as you discarded the pruta, that 10 cents that can be $1,000 worth, right, into the Mediterranean Sea, because you can't have any, because it's got holiness to it and you can't use it for anything. Okay, similarly, if one transferred the holiness of a mana's worth of produce that is a second tithe for a pruta's worth of other produce, holiness is transferred. He should then burn the produce to which he transferred the holiness so that it will not present an obstacle to others. Following the same procedure of redemption of Neta Ravoy in the present age, as explained in Hilchos Asura, similarly, if one transferred the holiness. Uh-huh. So instead of putting it onto right, you're taking $1,000 worth of food and you're transferring it to other produce, but a dime's worth, right? So the holiness is transferred. But then you have to burn the produce, right? Because otherwise someone might eat it. Just as we do not take the second tithe in the present heir to Jerusalem, so too we do not redeem it there, nor transfer its holiness or sell it. Means here transfer its holiness to produce, right? So we don't redeem it, in other words, for money, and take that money to Jerusalem, right? Or sell it. If produce of the second tithe is brought into Jerusalem, the present heir it should not be removed from there. Instead, we leave it there until it rots. So if a transgressor removed it there, he should leave it until it rots. So what happens is now you do the second tithing in Jerusalem was a problem because it's the place where you're supposed to bring it. So now you brought, it's in Jerusalem. That's a problem. Don't remove it. You have to wait till it rots. For this reason, we do not separate the second tithe in the present there in Jerusalem. So don't separate it in Jerusalem, because if you do, then that's a lot of produce that you're going to have to, right? That's before you redeem it onto a coin, right? But you separate it. You actually, here, you've got, 100 pounds of this, and you took 10%, right? Besides you took 10% second tithe. You're in Jerusalem. Well, now you can't do anything with that because you're in the place of where it would be used. So you can't redeem it at that point. Because once it comes to Jerusalem, whatever is in Jerusalem is meant to be used in Jerusalem. That's why back in the day, they didn't actually bring they didn't bring the food itself. They redeemed it on money at the value. Then it was on the value. Then they would take that money, the value of it, come to Jerusalem, purchase there because it was a long trek for many. And you would be burdened with lots of animals you'd have to bring in. It just, be a little a bit of a challenge. So instead, what do? We remove the product from the city while it is tevel meaning that it hasn't been taken from it the truma meiser, and we redeem it. It was separated there in the present. It should be left there to rot, as we mentioned. So anyone who eats an olive-sized portion of produce from the second tithe, who drinks a revius of wine from such produce outside the walls of Jerusalem, is liable for lashes. As it says in your gates, you may not partake of the tithe of your grain, your wine, or your oil. So that's biblical law, by the way, and that would be the times of the Holy Temple, right? I think, at least biblically. And since there's a prohibition here, remember we've learned that any prohibition in the Torah, I don't know, any prohibition in the Torah that you cannot fix what you did. In other words, you ate this outside of Jerusalem, the second tithe, right? You took the second tithe, you ate it outside of Jerusalem. You've transgressed a prohibition. You can't fix that. You can tshuva you can do. We're talking about fixing the act that was done, right? So you transgressed, therefore you're liable for lashes. He is liable for lashes for each one individually. Therefore, if he partakes of the three outside the walls of Jerusalem, he's liable for 3 sets of lashes. For it's stated, and you shall eat before God in the place he chooses to cause his name to dwell. It seems to be now repeating something. It must be observed whether the temple is standing or not standing. That means we partake of it only while the temple is standing, as the Torah says, and you shall eat before God the tithe of your grain, wine, and of your oil. And you may not partake of the tithe of your grain or your oil, wine of your oil. Why does the Torah mention them individually instead of saying do not partake of them at your gates? To make one liable for each one individually. So it sounds like he's repeating that just to bring us about the being liable individually for each one, right? So it's not just one sin, it's each 3 separate sins. If you had the wine, the oil, and the grain, right, outside of Jerusalem. Oh, now, so that seems like actually might only be rabbinic law. I'm not certain, but let's see over here. Number 6, according to the scriptural law, one is not liable for lashes unless he partakes of produce from the second tithe after it entered the walls of Jerusalem and was removed, as it says, you may not partake of your gates, in your gates. And you shall eat before God. Implied that is, that since the produce enters the place where it should be eaten, and then it was eaten outside of the place, one is liable for lashes. However, one ate such produce before it entered Jerusalem, should be given stripes of rebellious conduct. So this is only if you went into Jerusalem with it, and then you left, and you ate outside. Because the verse is saying that. Don't partake of it. That says you brought in the gates, meaning you brought it into the gates of Jerusalem. And then it says about not eating outside of it, means that you brought it out. So if you just separated it in your hometown outside of Jerusalem and you've ate it, then you would be liable for lashes only rabbinically. The following rules apply. If a portion of produce from the second tithe is inside Jerusalem and a portion is outside, one who eats from the portion that has not entered the city should be given stripes for rebellious conduct, and if one eats the portion entered outside that entered outside the city is liable for lashes. Okay, so you have both ways here. We do not redeem the second tithe in Jerusalem unless it became impure. Now, remember, this has to be eaten in holiness, meaning you have to be pure to eat it. The food has to be pure. As we learn, food can become impure, and you can become impure, right? Come in contact with a corpse, whether the food did or you did, right? So you eat the second time in Jerusalem, you don't redeem it in Jerusalem unless if it became impure, then you need to redeem it. If it says if the place will be distant from you, implied in such produce may be redeemed when the place is distant, but not when it is close. Right. Okay, that verse is it's speaking about impure over here, but not clear. 1 second. Okay. So you can only redeem it when you're distant, not in Jerusalem. The only exception is when it became impure, because now you can't eat it. Otherwise, you should only redeem it outside. You can only redeem it outside of Jerusalem. If a person is inside Jerusalem and his burden is outside, even if he carried it on a pole, since the produce from the second tithe itself was not brought into Jerusalem, it can be redeemed there next to the wall. Okay. I have to stop over here.
Thank you, Rabbi. Fine.
Wonderful Shabbos.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bless you all.
Shabbos.
Bye-bye.
Have a great Shabbos.